Hello, welcome to the God Theory podcast. Super salty because we got people watching our YouTube channel. I guess YouTube's cooler than the radio. When did that happen?
I never heard of video killing any kind of radio stars.
We keep getting subscribers to our YouTube, even though we really try to push the podcast version. But
the YouTube's kind of a happy accident. It's what we use to make the podcast, but whatevs.
Yeah, it's necessary, dude. But so, how's your week been, man? We're recording God Theory before our other one, so maybe there'll be a change of pace. Maybe we'll be more excited. Maybe we'll be less excited. I don't know. It's an experiment, people, and that's what scientists do.
It's true. My week has been pretty great. I've been on fall break, so plenty of relaxation, but I did have to go through a teacher training seminar, which I will complain about later.
That sounds good. I love good complaint. Can we make that the majority of the episode?
I will complain so much. It's the Bitching About Things podcast with David
and Jeremiah.
How was your week?
It was good, man. I went on a Cub Scout retreat. We're still doing the Cub Scout thing.
Yeah, it's good. In God we trust.
Yeah, I know. There's a lot of that, and then there's the Scout oath or something. You have to say something about God. I don't know. It's a whole thing, and I'm not really excited about it, but what can you do? What I do like is the family time we spend and the social aspect. The thing about Elijah is this kid is like a super genius. He was like, we get these little, those things on Facebook that say, a flashback to this time years ago.
Yeah.
We got those.
Capitalizing on that nostalgia.
Yeah. Yeah. We got one of those, and it was like Elijah reading in the car at Davian's age, and I was like, oh, fuck, Davian can't. Reading a chapter book, no pictures. And I was like, oh man, that's 4 years old. This kid was a super genius. But the problem is it makes him a little socially weird. He tries to talk to people, and he does these jokes that I think are funny, but I guess the people around him don't, because they're throwing a ball around, and he's like, yeah, that was one of them. He does weird stuff. He says he's got a really good sense of humor. No shit. He'll be like, oh yeah, because that's what people do all the time in life. You idiot, and or whatever, and I'll laugh, and I'm like, that's awesome, good pacing, that was good. You waited on those, you had it, you waited, good delivery, and nice content. It's commentary of human nature, nice. But other kids are like, I'm not an idiot or whatever, and I think he's I don't know, man. We don't want to skip him any grades because I don't know, how that goes. Yeah, and he's already so skinny. But anyway, the point is,
you need Parker.
Cub Scouts allows me to get out there and play sports and do physical stuff with people and hopefully learn how to do that, because
get a little socialized.
I know, I'm afraid he's going to turn into Stephen Hawking without the degenerative disease, just from being so scrawny. Not as smart. I don't mean he's that super genius. I mean he's smart, but I was joking about the effect of falling into a chair, never getting out.
I see.
I assume that's what happened. Stephen Hawking just fell in one day.
Yeah, I saw The Theory of Everything, and I'm pretty sure that's basically what happened. I zoned out.
Okay, good. That was my theory too. Well, awesome. Yeah. So this week, we've got quite a lot going on. What did you also planning a trip out to see you, dude?
Yes, coming out.
That's happening.
November. We'll actually have an in-person podcast, probably.
That'll be rad. Also, I'm looking to secure a guest for the podcast. The one that I was messing with, there's some easy low-hanging fruit like Matt Delahunty and Aaron. Wow, I shouldn't say that on air. That's horrible.
That's a terrible thing to say.
Horrible thing to say. No, we have connections with them, and they're good people. And Aaron Raw and stuff, or Aaron Raw, I'm sorry. Great people, very interesting. But we were shooting for a senator, so I was it's a little different. Hopefully they don't flatter themselves to be senators. They're great people, very interesting. Wish I could edit that out. Anyway,
if only there was a way to edit MP3s before you release them onto iTunes.
Probably first, busy with other things and securing some stuff for the other podcast. We were just a hot mess. Sorry. Yeah, but so what's going on in the news, man? What's happening with the theory of God? All things godly.
Well, it's been proven wrong. There's no God, so we can retire.
Awesome. Very cool. Dude, did you know who Deepak Chopra is?
Yes, I know who Deepak Chopra is.
So what do you know about him?
He's got a very Oprah Winfrey style of science where he just kind of makes shit up that sounds deep, but they're actually just deepities. They just sound deep, but they're not. So,
Yeah.
like, electrons have a consciousness that is resonating with your own consciousness, and if you put them into alignment, then the universe will provide.
Did you know he made a video game?
No.
Yeah, he did. It's on the Wii U actually, and it's also on the Xbox Connect. And it's like this meditating thing. Like you go to meditate, and it's actually pretty cool. Like as far as gaming goes, Eric Zimmerman, he's the famous dude that we're gonna interview on the other podcast, but he helped make it. No shit. So like the two podcasts somehow diverged into this. He helped to make it fun, because the idea of a meditating video game, how do you make that work? But with this, it's got a little camera and it watches you, so it teaches you, like, I guess it, like, oh, man, it's Deepak, you know, it's this dude, this fucking guy. He you know, like, you open your chest up and you turn, and like you make these little flowers get watered, and it looks like a fun, silly game, but it also puts you in certain positions that, you know, promotes relaxation. So it's actually kind of smart. Just the weird parts in between. It's with the universe, you know. And it's got two different voices. One's like a soothing female voice. It's like, hello and welcome. I'm trying to do a soothing female voice.
That sounds very soothing.
No, my voice is roboting. Oh man, I'm sorry, dude. Well, anyway, it's a soothing voice, not a robot voice. And yeah, and then he puts his voice on there too for whatever reason. Don't do that. I don't want to hear your voice.
No one wants that. All right, so let me rant a little bit about the virtues. You studied philosophy a little bit, right?
Yeah.
So one of the things I teach at a classical school, and so we like to have we fancy ourselves to have more of a classical approach to education. You know, grammar, logic, rhetoric, the trivium, that sort of thing.
Mm-hmm.
And so for our teacher in-service training, we had to read this article by, it's called Virtues Past and Present. It's by Jonathan Last. And he starts off by kind of being, I don't know, I'll read you a paragraph and you tell me what your impression is.
Okay.
So he's talking about Sterling, this Donald Sterling, this 80-year-old owner of a professional basketball team. He said some racist things, and the media kind of blew up on him in 2014. He said some things about African Americans, right? No foul language or racial slurs, but it was pretty nasty.
Yep.
And so he says none of this is meant as defense of Sterling. So he's just trying to say like what he did and like, you know, what he actually did. And he says, he seems by all accounts an unpleasant fellow who more or less got what he had coming. No, the point is to highlight America's shifting emphasis on differing virtues. Sterling's infidelity and the public humiliation of his wife, the woman to whom he had been married to for almost 60 years, who had borne him 3 children, was unremarkable. It was mentioned nowhere as a defect of Sterling's character. His private whispered racist thoughts, however, were important enough to elicit the displeasure of the leader of the free world. They were enough to cause his associates to expel from their business and deprive him of his property. In short, think of the litany of shame and approbation heaped on Hester Prynne and then multiply it by 1,000, except that it wasn't adultery that did Sterling in, it was racism. The Scarlet A doesn't exist anymore, but the Scarlet R is very real indeed. So what are your first impressions of that?
I mean, probably the false dichotomy, the being a fallacy. He's like, how come they didn't say anything about this, but they said something about this? It's like, well, you can do that. You can do that. Or they could say both. People probably publish both.
Yeah, like what did him in was the racism thing, but to me it felt like he was almost nostalgic for a day when people were more concerned about sex than they were about racial sensitivity. Like he's just like, I don't know. To me, when I think racism, I think of racism to the extreme. I think Holocaust. When I think about sexual promiscuity to the extreme, I think of orgies.
Holocaust? Pick up a book. Yes. Holocaust.
Sorry. But he goes on to say, the problem isn't that we no longer live in an age concerned with virtue. The problem is that we have organized ourselves around the wrong virtues. Did I say wrong? Sorry, that's so judgmental. Let's call them instead modern virtues. There are, by my count, 7 cardinal modern virtues: freedom, convenience, progress, equality, authenticity, health, and non-judgmentalism.
I like how you got a lisp like halfway through that. Progress.
But he's saying that like the modern virtues he basically argues that they're superficial. Like they're, a great line as he says, Yet at the same time that smoking tobacco has become verboten, smoking marijuana has been gaining wider acceptance. How could this be? It's not like being stoned is good for you. No, the emerging moral acceptance of marijuana comes because health is trumped by another of the modern virtues, freedom. Because today we tend to believe that people ought to be able to live however they like, and that societal norms should have little claim on them. So he's like equivocating cigarette smoking with marijuana, which is already stupid, right? We have one that's clearly killing people and the other one that has no documented like deaths to its name.
Yeah. Although one documented freak out, thank you very much. Me in your back room, just staring at the clock going, why is it moving so slow?
Yeah, but that's hilarious to everybody else. So it's
yeah, it is.
A gain, like it's a utilitarian good.
Yeah, it's not like it's not like you're like, Jeremiah, you're back there giving yourself cancer.
So anyway, it just really bugged me. He was trying to like everything classic, everything ancient is like the right values, and everything modern are just superficial, stupid values. Like he talks about one of the modern values is sustainable living, whatever that is. He literally says that, and then he says like he talks about free range chickens versus factory chickens and how that's suddenly a big value we have, and that's such a superficial thing. But isn't caring about suffering of animals, like I'm not a vegan, but I feel like if I were more moral, I probably would be. Like, isn't caring about suffering of anything kind of a value that's intrinsic and not just an external value?
Yeah, what the heck? I actually, I know some hunters, and then I was listening to the Joe Rogan podcast. I'm a fan of his, and he got into hunting, whereas he was like big into animal suffering too. Not huge, but he didn't like it. If he could, he would buy meat from those places, but he's into it now because he was like, well, if the animal's going to die for me, I can make sure with a good shot that it dies instantly or whatever. And, I kind of see if you're going to hunt and if you're not going to be a vegetarian, I could see the stuff that, the point of that. And I think, as we get less, like we don't have to worry about the food getting on our plate. We're good at finding worries. I don't know if you've heard about that happiness survey they did, but, so back in the day, they did this happiness survey where they try to find out generally how happy everyone is. And there's variability for sure. But the funny thing is most people revolve around, like, despite socioeconomic status or whatnot, they revolve kind of around the same. There's not as much variance as you'd expect. You'd expect 1 to 10 pretty heavily. You get someone who's like maybe someone who is here illegally in the sex trade or something being a 1. You'd think, right? I mean, I'm just guessing. And then a 10 you'd think would be like, I don't know, Bill Gates, right? Philanthropist, great guy, lots of money, happy marriage.
Sure.
Everything's great. But no, you find this like a real tight variation around, 6 or so. It was weird, even across the world. I mean, there's some variation, but they had to do that thing you do in marketing where you zoom in on the graph to make the variation look bigger,
Right.
So it's funny that happiness is relative. It really resonated with me when I saw that study.
Yeah, it's just, I don't. It really bugged me having to read this. Like he did not bother to hide his bias at all. Like there's a line that says, and I'm reading this word for word: you need not believe in God to pursue the virtues. Parentheses, though it certainly helps. Like, citation, please. Like, how many atheist crusades have there been? Like, how many atheist witch burnings have we had of late? Like, it's I don't know if we know that it helps. I'd like to see some evidence for that.
I had a talk with someone recently, and I've had it before, but for some reason it resonated with me recently. They said, I don't identify as an atheist, I identify as a humanist, because one's a negative assertion and one's a positive assertion that you can act on.
Right.
So whenever you do that, it seem so much worse when you say like humanitarianism versus Christianity. Like for some reason, you don't hear anybody doing humanitarian like crucifixions, right?
Yeah.
Humanitarian like
humanist book burnings.
Humanists, it's the humanists versus the civil rights. It never happens.
Yeah, so. Never happens. And so we had to read that article, which already put me in a bad mood because I'm a public school employee, right? I'm an employee of the state. I shouldn't have to read some guy being snide about how believing in God helps you find virtue. Like, fuck that guy. But then we start reading this pamphlet, this little book about classical education by Dr. Christopher Perrin. And at first I was kind of interested because I like classics. I'm a classicist in some ways. I studied it in school and I found it interesting. And it's kind of a history of classical education from the ancient Greeks to the Romans, through the medieval period, through the Enlightenment, and through today. And I was digging it, but then I started noticing he was just not a good writer. Like he was not like this guy was. I thought he was going to be an expert in pedagogy because he was writing a book about classical education, but he was making these bland assertions. He was saying like Latin helps you do better on things, but there were either no citations or there was a citation that was like promotelatin.org. I'm like, oh, that doesn't seem very biased at all.
Scholarly.
Promotelatin.org. Yeah, let's check that out. So like, and he was doing a lot of false dichotomies. There were tons of fallacies. And I was like, how is this? Like, this is not how academics write. I was in the humanities. My grad program was in the humanities. It wasn't a science, but we still learned how to avoid sounding like idiots when we were presenting our arguments.
Yeah.
This guy was not doing that. And so I looked up his credentials, Dr. Christopher Perrin. So I look him up and I'm like, okay, so, another thing that kind of like drew my eye was he was talking about classical education. He's like, yeah, they like to chant, they'll chat Latin verb conjugations, capitals of countries, Bible verses. And I was like, what? So I underlined Bible verses and put 2 question marks in the margins. I was like, what is happening?
Which is the universal symbol for what?
Yeah, it was my what? Marginalia. And so I was concerned. So I look him up. He's an author, consultant, speaker. He specializes in classical education. Okay, but what's his training? So I look at his credentials. He's received a bachelor's in arts, so a BA in history from University of South Carolina. Okay, whatever. And then his Master's of Divinity and a PhD in apologetics from Westminster Theological Seminary. He got a PhD in apologetics, and this motherfucker's putting the word doctor in front of his name and acting like he's a scholar. It pisses me off that just anybody who gets a PhD in anything gets to be treated like an academic. Like a PhD in apologetics, you might as well have a PhD in Silmarillion studies. Like la-di-da, you know about the orcs and the angels, but is that a real thing? And clearly they didn't teach him how to do it. Like I doubt he had to write anything that was peer reviewed to get his PhD. Like what's going on? Why are we just handing out this like DR period in front of everyone's name for anything?
Like all PhDs aren't created equal kind of thing?
Yes.
Yeah.
Like, and it's just, it goes back to that ultra crepidarianism of, yes, you're a doctor, but are you a doctor in what you're writing about? Because if so, if not, I don't really care about your PhD.
They're kind of not all the same, right? Like you hear someone who's got like a PhD in astrophysics or something, you're like, fuck me, this guy's smart. And you hear something like shitty, like psychology, and you're like, this guy's a fucking moron, right? No, I'm kidding. No, you hear something like someone who's like, I got a PhD in liberal studies or something. And not to say that liberal arts aren't important, but it doesn't feel the same.
PhDs in classics, like in classical history and classical studies, classical education. Like his books, the things he's written, he's wrote An Introduction to Classical Education, A Guide for Parents. That's what I read. The Greek Alphabet Code Cracker, Greek for Children, and Latin for Children. And he has a whole series of textbooks about teaching Latin. And he's got a PhD in apologetics and a bachelor's in history. La-di freaking da.
Ugh, and whenever I see this, I keep thinking the rat is always right. You know, I'm like, what drives this behavior? But I think I know. If you get a PhD in apologetics, what are you doing with your life? Nothing. You're thinking, why do I have so much student debt and nothing to pay for it, right? So you can't really get a job in apologetics. Well, I'm in the apologetics department over at Walmart, so I do apologetics work. Like, so you have to publish books, and then that, you can't just publish on apologetics. I mean, you can, but like what? You put like the comprehensive apologetic review, and then what? What do you do for the rest of your life? You need more money. So
right.
Then
it's not like there's a lot of innovations, and they're still using the ontological argument. So it's not like they've moved a lot since Saint Anselm into advancing that field.
Oh, the ontological argument. What a weird argument. We were just talking about this the other day. I read a paper.
God is real because perfect things are real. And if God wasn't perfect, he wouldn't be God, and perfect equals real. Therefore, God equals real. Boom. Nailed it. Ontological.
Think about it. But I heard this paper recently, like, I mean, this is probably like 3 years ago when I took a philosophy class, or, oh, Jesus, like 5 years ago. But anyway, it said, it was still trying to like decrack it, I guess. Like logically, there's like no obvious fallacy, but but it's just obviously wrong because remember Ganillo, that monk? Do you remember what he wrote back?
Yeah, he said there must exist a giant super island because like islands must be bigger than all other islands, or in order to be the biggest island, it has to be bigger than other islands, and also it must exist. Therefore, a giant super island must exist. He's basically applying the ontological argument to islands. And saying you could just apply it to anything you want.
This guy was creating Jurassic Park before it existed, but that guy was so smarmy too. Oh, he's hilarious.
The smarmy monk.
But yeah, that's not real apologetics. I don't think that's real good philosophy.
Yeah, it's just I don't know. Maybe I'm being a snob, but I really feel like if you have a PhD in apologetics or theology or something, and you're publishing about pedagogy or classical education, you should put like an asterisk by by your doctor where it says like Christopher Perrin. Like here's how his books all say. They say Christopher Perrin, comma MDiv, comma PhD. The PhD should have an asterisk that says in bullshit underneath in the fine print.
Or what if I wish we could get, I wish the word term doctor was a protected phrase. I sought people on this because I had a friend who, I mean, not a real friend, but a friend through the internet, and a friend of a friend who was seeing a therapist who was Dr. So-and-so, right? And this Dr. So-and-so was a piece of shit. And I say that because I don't make a lot of character judgments. I try to give everyone a good, and be like, hey, they're probably a good person. But this person is someone who's trying to help people who need help. And they're advertising themselves as, under the guise that they're a psychologist or someone who specializes in, put, 15 years of their life in helping people. And she has a PhD in communications and a bachelor in counseling. And I was like, okay, you can't do anything with a bachelor in counseling. You can't do anything. So she's not even a counselor. So she's really nothing. But she calls herself Dr. So-and-so. And I'm like, it says like, Dr. So-and-so, it's plastered everywhere. I specialize in helping you. And I use these kinds of therapies. Drives me crazy. Why can't we do PhD in blank?
Right. Just say what it's in so we know if it's relevant. Like if we can, because even if you have a PhD in psychology, you don't know everything about psychology. Like it's such specialized knowledge. And so, I don't know, there's a huge temptation to talk outside of your field, right?
Yeah.
Like my professor, one of my professors, his PhD was in French literature, but he specialized in Paris as a city, like as a model of cities. And that's where he was an expert in. I could ask him about that, and he was probably one of the leading experts in the field. But if I talked to him about Joan of Arc, like he had basically just a cursory knowledge of her. So just assuming that a PhD gives you free reign to talk about anything vaguely touching on your subject is ludicrous.
Yeah, that's crazy. Like somebody asked me about psychosis and how that related, or how often that like related to schizophrenia. I was like, dude, I don't know. Like, and I was like, I could find the answer for you. There are people in my department that are big in psychosis. Maybe there's some correlation there. I don't know, but there's a big temptation because people ask you, and like your whole currency as an academic, I mean, is what, like brain farts,
like credentials.
Yeah. So when somebody finally asks you, you're like, oh my god, all my training. I think it's probably like being a medical doctor whenever someone like gets a heart attack inside of a factory or something.
Is there a doctor in the house? And then
and you're like, I guess I am.
I mean, a real doctor. He's got like his PhD in apologetics. Oh, sorry, never mind. Speaking of that, we got an email regarding Carlson that we were talking about him. Is like, oh, he's a heart surgeon. He's a smart guy. He should know better. Do you remember that email?
Yes. Do you want me to pull it up?
Yeah, pull it up because I think that's relevant to our discussion here. Basically, he called us out on something, and yes, he raises a good point. We assumed. Or was it she? I forget who called us out, but somebody called us out.
It was a he. Someone named Scott.
All right, do you have that?
Yes, I do. It's right here. Okay. Scott says, a comment was made that said a neurosurgeon was a man of science. There's no reason to assume any MD is a person of science. They're educated in one specific activity, medicine. And even worse, a surgeon is a specialty within that. Similar to engineers, the actual process of science is never required in their education. As a former engineering student and now scientist, computer science counts, right? Question mark. I just had to point out this false association of MD and science. Thanks, and keep up the great podcasts, God and game theory listeners.
See, and that's a good point. Like, in some ways, it's a glorified technical trade, right? Like, it's a trade school.
In some way. Okay.
Okay, go ahead.
I'm going to use some mindfulness here. I regularly get into trouble. Not into trouble. So, okay, let me give you an example first, and then we'll extrapolate from there, because I'm used to taking like the large thing and then giving an example, but I heard that makes less popular appeal. It's more like writing for journals or some shit. But okay, so a good example is this. Someone came in just the other day and said like, hey, I'm having a horrible time in life, blah, 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 but now I'm on lithium. And so, and I was like, good God, lithium. Okay, well, what's going on? And, I already knew what's going on. And I 99% when you hear hooves, what's coming around the corner. And I was like, ugh. I do this now with patients or clients. I'll say, let me guess, psychiatrist and bipolar too. They're like, yeah. And I'm like, yeah, let me guess. You came in with some depressive symptoms and then they told you were manic as well at some point, even though you don't agree. They're like, yeah. I'm like, yeah, they're not trained in diagnosis. So yeah, they don't know what they're talking about. But and psychiatrists is, I hold them in higher regard than MD. Not that I hold none in bad regard, just in the field of mental health. Because whenever if I have something wrong with me, I'm going to MD, and they're the boss. Like, I have this thing on my shoulder, and I'm like, what do you think, doc? And they tell me, and I do it. Nobody I'm taking above that. But there's a strange, like, in America, because they're so well paid, we've got a great medical system. There's this weird, like, they call it God complex in medicine and mental health. A lot of people call it that because of these MDs get this idea. You're constantly people asking them questions. They have to sign things, and they're very important people. Lives are in their hands. But goddamn, do they ever step into my shit all the time? They're like, hey, I've got someone with ADHD. Will you take care of that? And I'm like, you do? They're like, yeah. And I'm like, who are you? And they're like, I'm Dr. So-and-so. I'm like, Doctor what? And they're like, MD. I'm like, oh, okay. Well, do you know that I'm actually the people who make disorders? That's us. Like, you've heard of the ICD, and you've heard of the DSM. That's us. So no, shut up. Because they get confused when I'm like, oh, okay, so what instrument do you use to diagnose? They're like, instrument? And I'm like, yeah, a validated assessment tool to understand the person's diagnosis differentially.
Kind of eyeball it.
Yeah, and they're like, I mean, list of symptoms. And I'm like, and did you rule out anything else? You realize ADHD is a rule-out disorder, right? You have to rule out a number of things before you can even approach that diagnosis. And they're like, sir. And anyway, I've had some straight up, some people were cool, some people were embarrassed, but most of the time they try to pull some God complex. They're like, listen, I'm going to send the stuff, and you do what you need to do. And I'm like, okay, I will, doctor. And I'm cool with that. Or like, all I'm saying is people need to not step out of their things. And I rarely get it in any other discipline than medicine for some reason, especially for a technical degree, where I'm like, well, you're a welder, you're not an engineer. You don't know why shit works. You're taught how to weld well. That's your job, and you do awesome at it. You may be the best ever, but don't start thinking you're a man of science, because you're not. You're not taught that. You're a technical degree.
Right. You learn how to.
And a great one.
You don't have to necessarily study why it works. You just learn that it works and how to do it.
Well, and they learn why it works, but they're not the people coming up with new diagnoses, right? They're not the people who understand like, you get biologists microbiologists or something, who follow, the virus, the life cycle of a virus and stuff. And I love hearing them talk. They're geniuses. But these aren't MDs. These are people who are researchers. I mean, they may have an MD, but this is their profession is not to be a doctor, to be a physician. Both are very, very important jobs. I'm not shitting on either one. I just hate whenever somebody puts on their hat like this guy who has a master or PhD in divinities and then proceeds to talk about education. I'm like, that doesn't make sense. Like, even if the thing about psychology is we're ultra crepidarians a lot. We step in everybody's shit and we're like, well, think about this. But I try to couch that by saying, like, I only know the human aspect of this, and here's how much I do or don't know about that. But here's how that relates to, let's say, business or consumerism.
Yeah. So going back to Dr. Perrin, though, like, for me, this is an example of Christian privilege in our society. Like, if I had a PhD in Zeus, like in Greek mythology, and I could tell you everything about, actually, that would make me more qualified to write this classical education thing, because there would be some overlap in Greek pedagogy, which is what classical education starts with. But like, if I was like a specialist in the Marvel canon, and I know everything about Thor and how many Spider-Men there have been and how many times Captain America has died, and I get a PhD in it, and I put my name as Dr. Drake, and I started writing books about education, and somebody
you called it Beats by Drake.
Beats by Drake, exactly. But if somebody looked me up and called me out on that, I would be humiliated, because my PhD in Marvel cosmology gives me no authority at all to discuss education. But for some reason, a PhD in apologetics, which is just the Marvel universe 2,000 years ago, it's what they had for that. Like, religion is essentially just comic books from another time. And suddenly everyone gives them all these, like, oh, Dr. Perrin. Yes, Dr. Perrin's going to come lecture. We're going to pay Dr. Perrin to come give a conference here at our school. Yeah.
I think it's weird, too, that that's an applied degree. Because you know how there's an applied science, like there's experimental psychology and then clinical psychology. And me, ours is a little weird. It's a scientist practitioner model. It's way too much fucking school is what it is. It's under review. But anyway, like the PsyD is a good example of this. It would be like an MD. It's purely a practical degree. They learn all the shit and then they go and do it. And they don't do research. They don't have to. That's an applied science. And it's funny because apologetics is like an applied liberal arts degree. When does that happen? Like, I'm a Marvel Arts cosmologist apologist. PhD. Thank you. That's just weird. You're not like a lore specialist. You're like a lore defender.
Yeah.
Doesn't that strike you as strange?
It's pretty, it's just, if you step out of it and you just take away the special position and privilege we give Christianity, it's a really weird phenomenon in our society that we give them so much credence. We give them PhDs. We offer PhDs at seminaries, and then we just treat them like normal PhDs.
Yeah, yeah. And you know, it's funny that even within the secular community at large, I still get people, and we need to be real careful about this. I do this too, but we get real careful. We need to be real careful about what is it? It's confirmation bias, but it's wanting your reality to adhere to your desires, right? Like, for example, oh hey, Hillary Clinton won the debate. Maybe she did. Maybe she didn't. I don't know. But you know, or someone else says, you know, oh, and then they go and search articles for Hillary winning. I got in an argument where somebody was trying to contest me about human collection, and they're like, do you know the limitations of survey data? And I was like, I absolutely do know the limitations of survey data. That's literally what my PhD is getting in, or that's the field that my PhD is in. Yes, in fact, I just actively defended the survey or the online method to my advisor literally less than a week ago. We went over a bunch of articles. Yes, I'm very familiar with the research of that. And they're like, well, then you're wrong on this other topic. And I was like, man. And then they linked someone, and they're like, how about Nate Silver? And I was like, what's his credentials? And they're like, I don't know. I'm like, he's a business writer. I don't care about his opinion on data. Here's the actual articles from research. What? Like, because this person wanted Hillary to have won the debate so badly. And good guy, smart guy, awesome, very intelligent. But what the hell? It's just, we have to be careful, because all I'm saying is everybody can fall into bias. And it was like one of these Facebook dialogues that no one checks into. You start reading, like, oh, these two idiots, you know, and you leave. It was one of those. But I just want to caution, because I've gotten called on that a lot. Like, another one was, I was like, oh, I'm actually one of the leading people on mass murder suicides, and here's the leading theory on it. It's actually multidimensional or multidiscipline, which rarely happens. And we all agree, neuroscientists, everyone, we all agree this is how it happens. And they're like, but that's not true, Jeremiah. You're a misogynist. And I was like, well, I hope I'm not. Self-assessment says I'm not, but Elliot Rodger really didn't kill because of misogyny. It's actually incidental. I hate to say that, but it's true. And they're like, oh, you hate women. And I'm like, man, remember, I'm just going to remind everyone again, this is what I do. Let me just send a quick email out to the top guy in the world on this real quick. This is the guy who wrote for CNN Time, who appeared on the board of Joe Biden after the Sandy Hook shootings. Let me just send an email. That's how close we are, because I'm literally one of the top. Yeah, he just wrote back. Yeah, copied and pasted. And then finally it was crickets. And I was like, thank you. Because you can Google that guy. Like, he's out making appearances. But
yeah.
It took that, like, and this went on for like, how many comments? Like 200 something comments? People call me the worst things. I think we just need to be careful in general.
Yeah. Speaking of being careful, you asked me what was going on in the news. This takes place in your homeland of Mississippi. Okay, so high school, and this kind of fits into both of our things, because I teach at a high school, and I'm very careful about this. They had a mandatory assembly for senior class. It's in Rankin High School, which is it's in Rankin County, Mississippi.
Okay. Oh, again? Oh, these are the guys who keep getting busted, David.
Yes, they have this assembly, and you know, mandatory assemblies, those happen. And then the next day, the junior class had to go to an assembly, and then the next week, the sophomores had to go. And they didn't tell the students what the assemblies were about, and they did not allow them to opt out. It was mandatory; they all had to go. All three assemblies were these Christian video presentations about how students could find hope in Jesus, since they couldn't find hope elsewhere. And you know, one student actually recorded on his phone and like brought it to the attention of the AHA, and you know, they got busted for it. The AHA filed a lawsuit. They won the case, and they actually said every time there's a subsequent church-state violation, that school gets to pay $10,000 to the AHA. Like, stop doing that. Stop. Wow. Stop. Like, that's a pretty clear, like, go fuck yourself. Stop doing this judgment. Yeah. But by the way, they phrased it, the Christian media phrased this story as humanists fuming over high school assembly offering hope in Christ to troubled teens. It goes back to what you were saying. Like, when you phrase it as humanist, it sounds weird, but they were like, humanists are fuming over high school assembly offering hope in Christ to troubled teens. What a bunch of assholes. Wow, being upset about that.
So are you surprised they didn't use the word atheist? You think that would be a low-hanging fruit there? You could just kind of grab it.
Yeah, but apparently humanist is becoming its own buzzword. However, here's the funny thing. Talking about that in school, one of the teachers says this. The teacher, discussing this, he's also a pastor of the Baptist church, so he's a teacher and a pastor, told his class, quote, "Atheists are throwing a fit because they don't have their own day. They do have their own day. It's called April Fool's Day because you are a fool if you don't believe in God." In a school classroom, he says this.
Holy shit. Oh, they like losing money. I feel bad for them.
I know, it's like, well, it's tax money. Everybody gets fucked when they do this. It's not like they have to pay it out of their own pocket. Like these schools are giving tax dollars to these stupid lawsuits. And
Mississippi doesn't have much money. I just want everyone to know that.
Yeah, you guys are running in the red.
Yeah, we're one of the only states who takes money from the federal government every year because we're so embarrassed of ourselves. I need to stop saying we. I'm borrowing this residential. I don't identify.
It's very simple because this comes up all the time with teachers. You do not lose your freedom of a religion when you work for the government. You still have freedom of religion, just like Kim Davis does. But as an agent of the government, you cannot give preferential treatment to any religion or atheism. You have to stay neutral about the whole thing. It's called there's a whole clause, right? It's the the preferential clause, or the what's it? I sound like an idiot now. The amendment of the Constitution that says that the church and state must be separate. The Establishment Clause. Got it. It's the Establishment Clause. Man, that was hard to think of. But you cannot. It's just not a hard concept. You cannot have both about political opinions. Like I cannot say Trump is an idiot as a teacher, and about religious opinions. Like if there's a prayer circle at around a flagpole in the morning before school, teachers cannot go to that because that would be seen as being in our function as a teacher endorsing a religion. You cannot. You can pray at your house, but at school you have to be a neutral government agent. It's not a hard concept.
Oh no, it's back. Sorry. Yeah, that doesn't seem like too hard of it. It's weird that whenever someone was explaining privilege to me, because I never understood it, and I always thought, oh, here we go, because I didn't know. And that's the problem, is that you don't know. Is in multicultural, they're talking about it, and they're like, have you ever had to think about the fact that you're a white male? And I was like, man, no, I guess not. Do other people? And I was like, yeah, all the time. And then I kind of got it, because at the time I was definitely moved away from religion, and I was like, well, son of a bitch, yeah, I guess I get it. You never had to think about it. So, like, here's a classic example. Someone I know was like, hey, October's coming up, or Halloween's coming up in particular. And, a bunch of kids come by. We've got a real big house, we get 1,000 kids, maybe 1,000 kids, something like that. Does anybody know a way that we can witness to them real quickly? Maybe some chick tracks, these little tracks. And I was like, oh my God. Like, imagine if I had said something like that. If I'm like, yeah, there's a lot of kids that come through here, and most of them believe in Jesus. Do we have a real quick way that I can just totally dispel that myth? That should
be up in arms.
Yeah. And so now I get it. Now I'm like, oh, okay, I get it. The fact that you never even have to stop and think about your position every once in a while, it's just so shitty.
Yeah, and whenever you call them out on this, they're like, oh no, we're allowed to do this, which they're wrong. They can. But even if they were, it's not a nice thing to do. You're alienating your non-Christian students. It's just not I don't know, there's something about do unto others that's in your Bible somewhere. Maybe you should start doing that, and maybe treat all of your students as if they were yourself instead of privileging the majority.
Yeah, moral. Yeah, exactly. Because yes, law is supposed to have some form of protecting morality, but it doesn't. Like, it absolutely makes, there's nothing immoral about jaywalking across an empty road, right? There's no immorality to that. I mean, other than, unless you go by like Kant, deontological stuff. But the point is that if you I'm starting to think about that. Settle down, brain, come back. There's also, if something's moral, doesn't necessarily mean or immoral, doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to be illegal. Like, you could take a mirror and have it sitting up there, and every time someone walks by, like some beautiful woman or man, like let's use Angelina Jolie and Brad Pitt for time's sake.
Okay, Mr.
Every time, yeah, so the guy, when he walks by, he sees Brad Pitt, and every time the girl walks by, they see Angelina Jolie, and you're like, oh my gosh, you guys look exactly like this today. Somebody could walk up and be like, bullshit, you guys are clearly using camera tricks. What the hell? And they're like, yeah, it's not illegal. And you're like, well, I mean, I guess it's not, but that's really shitty. Like these people might go to job interviews or something. I guess that's a relatively harmless one. But the point is, it's not harmful to lie. You could tell like an old lady, you could be like, oh yeah, you've got your crutches there. That's fine. Yeah, just walk across. And then she falls down. You're like, ha, and you walk off. Or you just walk up to someone and you're like, dick, and then walk off. And they're like, you shouldn't do that. And you're like, yeah, it's not illegal, which is true. It's not illegal to do those.
Be a dick on Facebook. It's not illegal. It's just a dick thing to do. Donald Trump does a lot of horrible things in real life, and he's not getting arrested for it. Just because something is legal doesn't mean you should do it. And also, it's not legal. That's the main point I'm trying to make. If you're working for a school or any government position, but for me, schools are what I think about. Stop promoting religions. Just stop. It's not your job. It's not.
But how do they even know?
But Mr. Drake, you promote atheism. I don't. I promote critical thinking that ends up leading to atheism, but that's just a side effect of critical thinking as you get better at judging reality.
Well, and that's the difference. It's explicit. It's your explicit job as an educator is to teach it critical thinking. It's literally in probably every curriculum or even syllabus, for God's sakes, it talks about it.
It's like every that's why we have educators.
Yeah, it's not like if it's an English class, it's not like to promote grammar and more of a stronger vocabulary so that you can pray.
Yeah, it's just I don't know. It's one of my ranting issues that I see this happen all the time, and they always think they're going to get away with it, and they never do. They never win that. There's never been like a time where it goes to court and they're like, yeah, that's fine. Keep preaching to the students. Like, I don't know why they think they're going to be the one exception where the judges are going to side with them on this. It's a subtle deal.
Oh, no, I know why. Well, now. Before I didn't. But now, Jesus. I mean, now everybody's even citing Kim Davis when they do this bullshit. Have you heard about this Alabama? Is it Alabama thing? With the they're denying, or what is it, not denying?
Yeah, we covered that last week where it's just like no more marriages for anybody.
Yeah, that was it, yeah. And why? Because what? Look, instant publicity. I mean, and the fact that they're going to be martyrs. That's awesome. So, well. I hear you, man. I also did a rant, so... Anyway, well, I think that pretty much wraps us up. We had a little feedback, but some of it was trolling friends, like personal friends in real life, like putting up that video and they're like, favorite video ever, and it was our promotion. But
like 10-second video, yeah.
Yeah. And then I did a lot of live tweeting on the Bernie or the Democrat debate thing. Talked to some people. That was pretty fun. I don't normally tweet, but I did this time. So trying to get into Twitter, man. It's like a whole thing.
It's weird seeing the infighting between Republicans and the infighting between Democrats, because the Republican infighting is just kind of self-destructing, like shooting ourselves in the face to ruin it. Like it's very toxic. And then the Democratic infighting is like, hey guys, maybe we should stop trying to divide ourselves between Bernie and Hillary. I mean, it's fine if either one of them wins. Like that's the kind of articles I'm seeing from Democrats. And I'm like, wow, it's very polite. It's very kind of like, hey, let's just all try to get along. And then Bernie on the debates like, hey, let's just stop talking about emails. That's not helping anybody. And just like giving Hillary a hug. Like it's a very different level of, I don't know, politeness in the Democrat primaries.
I know there's two things I wanted to mention on that. One, there was a study that came out. Social media analysis is something I'm starting to get into. They did a social media analysis of the different candidates to determine what kind of factors they could find. One of the most obvious one was misspellings. Guess which candidate they found had the most followers that misspelled the most?
Ignorance begets ignorance. I'm going to say Trump.
Yep, it was Trump by a landslide too. So that was a pretty funny study. Another one was, or not another study, but another comment I thought I'd make was that while you also see some civility, between like people who support maybe Hillary or whoever might possibly support Chaffee or Sanders, you do see civility. You also see a little vitriol. But the funny thing is, whenever I look at the two differences, one, misspellings, two, on the debate of Trump's side where these Trump versus Carson people, but on the funny thing is on the Democratic one, I see a lot of citations. I'm not seeing that on the other. It's funny. Like there seems to be, to me at least, is my qualitative not data. Plural of anecdote is not data. But man, I seem to notice a lot of like these links, people linking things like charts and graphs and numbers, and it just feels like a new, a different way of debating, a different way of thinking, a different way of establishing your point.
Right, wanting to have more than just blind opinion.
Yeah, sometimes I wonder if that's because like they think the ultimate authority is God, and truth, it has its own power, like say the name, or this truth will hold strong. you never hear that crap from non-believers. Non-believers are typically, you know, say things, and not all Democrats are non-believers, but you hear them typically say things like, you know, an authority would be the best thing we got so far, which is, you know, maybe some more studies.
I wonder if education plays into it too. The fact that the more educated you are, the more you're trained into wanting to see citations and, you know, academic writing. And this is just spitballing off the top of my head, so this might not be true, but I would guess that supporters of Sanders or Clinton tend to have a higher overall level of education than supporters of Trump.
Yeah, I'll bet that's probably true. Carson, that's another one I don't get, man. Speaking of education, this guy says some weird shit. You know what he said about the Democratic debate? I can't believe, because I've got a lot of friends on both sides. Fox News, like, and you know, I try to watch everything dispassionately, objectively, as best as I can. But as soon as you start talking, they're like, "So what did you think about the Democrat debate? How do you think about, you know, Sanders versus Clinton?" And he was like, he goes, you know, to be honest, I kind of slept through the whole thing. I'd wake up every once in a while, but I'd fight off, and I just kept falling back asleep. You know, there's nothing interesting in there. And I was like, whoa, I watched the whole Republican debate, and I'm not running for president.
Well, in all fairness, the Republican debate's a lot more entertaining because it's just like mudslinging and craziness.
Yeah, it's a clown car, you're right.
Like a reality show. Like it's going to be, you're just looking for entertainment. I can see why you'd be bored by people rationally and reasonably discussing things. But I don't. Did you see Huckabee's tweet about Bernie Sanders, by the way?
Holy shit, the racist one?
Yeah, it was, and it wasn't even funny. Like, I'm not one of those people who takes comedy like, oh, you can't be racist in comedy, you can't talk about rape, you know, all these things off the table. Because sometimes the fact that it's not inappropriate, that shock value kind of helps the joke.
Right.
But he was like, I would trust Bernie Sanders with my money the same way I trust a North Korean chef with my Labrador. And come on, really? Koreans eating dogs? Like, that's the well you're going to draw from? Like, that's such a stretched analogy. It's not even funny on a comedy level. And then on top of that, it's racist.
Also, your son literally killed a dog, and that's why he got in trouble. And then beyond that, like right before that, it was like, hey, he went from, it said, we don't have a color problem or a race problem. We've got what was it? A faith problem, wasn't it?
Right.
That was the tweet he did right before that. So he was like calling out racism. And then within 15 minutes, or maybe it was 45 minutes, he quickly jumped over and said something super racist.
Right.
It kind of ruins. It's like throwing a what's a good example? Throwing a horseradish into any recipe. You put a little bit in there, and it fucks up everything. And so same thing with this. Like, you can't say one racist thing, even if all your other tweets are like, "Hey, we should all get along," and then all of a sudden you're like, "You know who sucks? The Jews!" Like, it ruins. No one can trust you again. So.
Yeah,
this guy, he's crazy.
By the way, my new political tactic on Facebook is anyone that criticizes Bernie Sanders, I call him anti-Semitic. Really shuts him down.
Well, I mean, I guess not. I would take it from some of the. I actually got in a debate one time that said there's no such thing as feminist extremists.
Really? I feel like any position could have extremists. I think that's definitionally just taking anything to the extreme makes you an extremist.
Right, I took it for granted because I measure humans and attitudes and beliefs, and I was like, oh, they a lot of them fall in the bell curve. It's shocking how many bell curves we get out of human thoughts. It's strange, but I was like, oh, there's always outliers. I mean, yeah, and whether how smooth you consider your bell curve or how pointed, how many outliers you have, depends on your position or your opinion, or your understanding of the data, but surely you believe there's some extremists. And they were like, no, what are you, misogynist? And I was like, I don't know how many times I get called that. And no, I'm really excited about women's rights.
I'm actually quite a fan. I'm a big fan of women. I don't hate them at
all. Every time I get a chance, I'm gonna speak out for it. I think it's great. It was the weirdest conversation I had. But anyway, we are over time. I know we gotta go. We've got a fancy schmancy dude. We got a interview here in just a few minutes. So
all right.
On that note, we'll see you guys next week, and thanks for tuning in.